Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Moxtober Daily Recap. I'm Caillou, joined today by Ancestral of MTG.Design and Zarepath, who's a longtime member of the custom magic community and the designer of the sets Netropolis and Karsus. Today's word is thief. And if you don't know what Moxtober is, it's an annual event where for each day of the month of October, there's a one-word prompt based on which people make creative things related to Magic the Gathering. Most people make custom magic cards, which is what we look over in these daily recaps, but people also write articles, make deck lists, draw art, basically whatever strikes their fancy. So I think, oh yeah, and as always, if you want the designer credits for any and all of the cards we talk about today, that's in the description. There's also the full MSC and MTG.Design list of cards that were submitted, as well as instructions on how you can submit your own cards to be considered for these recaps. But yeah, with that, let's get started. And I think I will start us off with. Well, let's start us off with a card by someone who couldn't join us today, unfortunately. It's going to be from the MTG.Design file, Mark Confidant's Vile Conquistador. Um,
Ah,
and so it's 2/2 for white and a black Vampire Soldier. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent ransoms a card from their hand or a non-token permanent they control. So they exile it, and then at any time they can pay 3 to return it to their hand. As long as you control fewer lands than an opponent, you may play lands opponents have ransomed. There's also a different version, which I'm assuming was like a V 1.0 of this, where
One says from and the other says
yeah. Oh
in.
wait, oops. I didn't realize that it only said lands. For some reason, I just assumed that it said cards on the other one. But yeah, okay. I really like this idea both flavorfully and mechanically. Um, I think that the white part comes in through the fewer lands an opponent. You can yoink their lands. I like the idea of like this being pseudo discard or plus tempo. Um, yeah, it just feels very white, and obviously there's you've got that Ixalan flavor going on with the Conquistador, and it's a well chosen art. I would be very surprised if it was not actually just straight up intended to be an Ixalan Conquistador. So, um,
I really love, if I can chime in, I
oh
don't know
yeah,
if
I
that's
was just
how we
wrapping
go
up. Go
around.
ahead.
I really like how normally when an opponent's, rats or some other creature makes you want to discard a card, a lot of times players will be like, well, discard this land. I'm likely to draw one, or I already have too many lands. But there's a real risk to, like that adds more to the consideration. If I discard this land or exile it or ransom it, as the case may be, they may get to use that land if, they miss their own land drop. And I like that complicates what's normally a practiced decision in Magic.
Yeah, black sometimes has those drawbacks for choosing a land, and this is kind of a new or different sort of drawback. Like uh, the Black Red Titan that we most recently had from Theros Beyond Death had like if you discarded a land card, then hey, you got to lose 3 life. So I do like that wrinkle, and I do like the temporary exile effect. I think that it's something we don't see that often. Usually we see it's exiled until this permanent is leaves the battlefield, but I like that it's not a total showstopper. That pay 3, you can put it back in, kind of like adding a companion to your hand. I think the thing that I really like about it the most, though, is just the ransom part. Just like that as a as a like a keyworded ability, if well, an ability anyway.
Yeah, and I like
Yeah.
how it isn't just ransom has card in their hand or non-token permanent they control baked in. So you can do lots of cool stuff with like ransom the top card of their library or ransom a card in their graveyard or like the ransom yeah, just basically like ways that you can like gain resources from ransoming that doesn't actually put your opponent down into card disadvantage. So you can actually like build around it as a mechanic more. So that's definitely something I like about it a lot.
It's definitely a mechanic that has a lot of space. a lot of different applications. But I particularly like pairing it with discard because um, discarding cards, making your opponent discard cards, feels very black and transgressive in a fun way. But being on the other end of things, it can feel kind of awful. But if you are discarding your stuff, knowing that you will eventually have a chance to get it back, um, it doesn't sting nearly as much. And it
Yeah,
gives you some more decision points, which are interesting.
yeah, it gives you more decision points. It adds to the tension of the game because it's like you're still in a disadvantageous position, but there's always this potential of like, oh, maybe I could get out, maybe I could get my wrath back or get my land back or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
while also not being a feels bad for the person playing this because they're like, aha, I got my tempo. All right, time to capitalize. So, um, but yeah, ancestral. What is your next card going to be, or your first card?
Sure,
It is
we'll
your
go.
day.
Yeah, we'll go with Repeat Offender, which is in the MSC file. So Repeat Offender, 2 black and a red. When it enters the battlefield, if you're a thief, gain control of target creature, untap it, and it gains haste. It's a 3/3 human rogue. And this was designed by Cajun. I like that this is kind of changing the narrative of the thief. This is players can be thieves, and I think that's a lot of fun. The You're a thief if you control a permanent you don't own, or if you control 3 more rogues. So very good in like sort of a rogue tribal deck if you've got a lot of rogues in your side. I sort of like that, the idea of who you associate with sort of dictates the type of person you are, I guess. And I like that, it's sort of playing into your role. So there's a little bit of, I guess, a snowball effect here. Like, once you've taken something, although it is until end of turn, um, but it's not broken. Uh, it's not too crazy. And I think the flavor of a thief really shines through.
Yeah, I like the idea of like giving players classes, and I think that if anyone wants to like revisit potentially like a D&D style setting, having like mock tribal this way, where you can turn it on by doing some game action, but also just by going full tribal for maximum benefit, would be really cool. One thing that I don't like about this design is that it feels like this effect is something that you'd be using to trigger thief. Like, okay, cool. I like it'll be a feels bad because you're like, oh yeah, this is like a good thief enabler, but I already need to be a thief to
Mm.
like have this go. And if it isn't a thief, then um, I just end up like getting a vanilla 3/3. I think that something like when repeat offender enters battlefield, if you're a thief, you instead get to what's the cradle snatch from Eldraine, the one that's like it's basically an ambitious or sorry act of treason, but for creatures 3 with the I don't remember if
Yeah.
it's power or
CMC
CMC.
3 or less.
Yeah, CMC 3 or
Mana
less.
value 3 or
And
less.
if you're a thief, just gain control of target creature until gain control of target creature until end of turn instead. So that way, there's like you can still use it to turn on thief, but if you're already a thief, you get maximum benefit by getting an act of treason attached to an already respectable body. So
Yeah. Or because the flavor concept of the card is a repeat offender. So this is something that, well, I guess you don't do this more than once, even on the card itself. But I like the idea of active treasoning something, and then it checks if you're a thief. Like if you control,
Mm.
but
well,
then that's just
I was
free. Yeah.
yeah, I was thinking the number 3 because you have to have 3 or more rogues, but that's not actually. You just have to control anything. So yeah, that doesn't work. But yeah, something like you said, where it doesn't self-solve as its bonus, because then it feels like a weird gate to the payoff.
And perhaps you could stick a keyword on here that 3/3 for 4, and totally an active treason effect is still very strong, but um, maybe it was a 3/3 with haste for 5 or something like that, and this ability.
Yeah.
Although maybe that would be a little bit strong too, because you'd have a 3/3 that can attack, and you have your opponent's creature. But maybe there's something or just like you were saying earlier, if you're not a thief, then maybe you can study to become a thief, right? You can scry one or something.
Or have it just be an attack trigger, like let it enter play, and maybe you're not a thief yet, but you can build up to being a thief and then attack and get the attack trigger.
Ooh, I do
You know,
yeah, an attack trigger is kind of cool. Though maybe it'd have to cost a little bit more if it was going to be repeatable, but it's also a 3/3, so they can eat it. But
yeah,
yeah,
you tweak the numbers accordingly, but
but
yeah.
yeah, I do like that concept. Okay, Zarepath, what is your first card of the day going to be?
Okay, so mine is Conquer from MTG uh, Design, and I I recall seeing some people discussing this prompt from Moxtober and trying to think of ways that green and white can steal stuff because they are the colors that least steal things. And seeing this card, I was like, oh, that's a really cool application. It's definitely a tweak to the pie, but I love that, Conquer, it's 3 white and a green, gain control of target land and opponent controls, and untap it. There's something very simple and resonant about it. And the fact that it's this very simple, powerful, conceptual word, and you know exactly what's happening here. And flavorfully, it feels incredibly white. The idea of empires, expanding and securing territory, even if that's land that somebody else controls, they now control it through might, the right of might, from their perspective. And it just feels like a really resonant approach to the idea. And there's something kind of high concept about on the day Thief. You have this card called Conquer, right? That is like a different perspective of thievery and kind of the empire level. And it's also I like having these nice, simple, resonant, powerful cards that as soon as you see it, you get the whole story, the whole narrative. You don't have to read lots of lines of text and abilities to figure out, oh, that's how the concept comes together. If anything, I wish maybe it could feel mechanically white more somehow. That kind of makes it a little less punchy, but I wonder if there's something you could add to it that would make it feel like a green-white card um, instead of just a ramp card that's also land destruction at the same time. So, like, basically, this is what's that Gruul card? It's like Pillage and Burn or something. I forget what it's called, but it's basically 5 mana and you ramp a card and destroy a land. And this is essentially the same thing, but green-white with strong green-white flavor.
Yeah, part of me was initially, if I was thinking of this design, I would have thought of an aura, and just like having the aura on the land, and then hey, if you blow the land up, it reverts back to its original owner. That in a way, perhaps this is a bit stronger because you just keep the land forever. Although it might depend on the game, right? Like in some limited environments, this is just going to be a last pick card because there's just not that many non-basic lands. But certainly in maybe more important games of Modern or Commander or something like that, it certainly could be really interesting. And the fact that you can untap it, but part of me is kind of like, what if it wasn't like an enchantment, or even if it was, kind of like an Oblivion Ring sort of
Yeah.
effect. But even as is, I think it's fine. It's, I don't know, 5 mana, 2 colors. It does seem a little steep, but I guess if the payoff is good, right? If the land is really, um, really a good land, certainly you can't make it a lot. You can't make it a lot cheaper because we certainly don't want, land destruction. Or in this case, it's even more powerful than land destruction because you're going up a land, your opponent is going down a land.
Yeah. I think I really like the Oblivion Ring idea because that feels very white of, white's answers have answers. And, green and white are enchantment colors. So a green white enchantment that ramps you, denies them a land, but they still have a way to answer it maybe, if they have enchantment removal or something. That also feels more like conquering, which isn't an eternal thing, right? If you conquer a territory, you still have to hold it somehow. It can be regained. And I think the Oblivion Ring concept works well for that.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add. I think it's a interesting design that definitely made me do a double take when I first saw it, but then go like, yeah, okay, I can get behind this. Um, but I think in a similar vein, talking about uh, green white cards on Thievery Day, um, Beargle Cowle from the
Ah,
MSC file was the one that gave me that feeling. So we got Beargle Cowle, Heroic Outlaw, one green and a white. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, if its power is greater than each other creature's power, you put a -1/-1 counter on it and a +1/+1 creature and target creature you control. So it's essentially bare Robin Hood, and it steals power from the strong and gives it to the weak. And I thought this was a fantastic idea for like green white thievery. It feels very on brand. Um, and I think that like with thieving, it's very easy to go to like, oh, artifacts or like cards or like there's very clear game objects that work well with thievery, and this is one that I think is more unconventional slash is not what would come to most people's minds start off with. So, uh, oh yeah, also, I think I forgot to mention for the previous design for Conquer, shout out to MelonMars for being the designer on that one. Um, and for Beargle, Beargle. Oh, also, I just realized that Beargle sounds kind of like Beargle, so that's
uh,
probably where it came from. So yeah, shout out to Jayhew for this design. Yeah, I guess that's the
uh,
stand-up by comments for that.
yeah. I mean, it's certainly it's Robin Hood as a bear. He's got the bow and he's got reach. Well, and I say he, but you know, uh, whatever Beargle Cowle is here, I think the only possible, I don't even know if it's an issue. I think in most environments it's not going to be a big problem, but you've got -1/-1 counters and +1/+1 counters, which
yeah.
the interaction there is a little interesting because if you put a +1/+1 on a -1, they basically cancel out or they're on the same permanent. But if we kind of ignore that because maybe it's a minor issue, I think it's fine. I think that it really wants to be in a high powers matter deck. What's kind of interesting is that it's symmetric, so it doesn't really matter who brings the creature out. So in a way, I guess it's just a little bit stronger for the player because if they, in other words, if your deck is mostly just 1/1s and 2/2s, presumably other players, especially in a multiplayer format, will likely have bigger creatures. So if you can do something with counters, then this could be kind of fun as a commander.
I was thinking the same thing, both on the counter conflict and also on it being a really interesting commander. I only design like sets. I don't design much for multiplayer stuff where I think different kinds of counters is more okay because in commander there's so many different mechanics going on. Like no one is saying that's too many mechanics or these mechanics don't perfectly synergize together. Um, but I totally agree that this is an interesting commander because I love how the ability is kind of self-solving in that the more you use it, the harder it is to keep going, which is kind of an interesting challenge as a player and a deck builder to like get the most out of your deck and how are you going to build it to ensure you have big creature fall triggers, but also tiny creatures that can benefit from that, from the growth. And maybe you throw in ways to use +1/+1 counters as a resource so that you can make your guys small again so they're easier to trigger again. You could throw in like the pursued or hunted creatures, the ones that make tokens for your opponents, because I feel like sometimes those will make like a dragon or something that's going to be bigger than what you already have going on to kind of force the triggers to happen. And so you can build it such that you have lots of small stuff. You can build it so that you always have big stuff. There's just a lot of different approaches you could take, and it just has got my mind, running 1,000 miles an hour as far as deck building goes, which is that's the kind of legendary design I really like. So I think this is a great design.
Yeah, card good, TM. So once again, shout out to Jayhew and Ancestral. What is your next card going to be?
So, this isn't actually a whole lot different from Beargle. But the card is Vitality Siphoner. This is on mtg.design. 2 and a black, has Wither, and whenever you put a -1/-1 counter on a creature, you can put that many +1/+1s on Vitality Siphoner. It's a 2/3. This is designed by UnConstitutional. So I like that it's sort of it is a vampire wizard, right? So we get a lot of these vampires that, it kills a creature, you put a counter on it. And so this is kind of a fun way of using Wither. Taking advantage of Wither, right? So you're literally making another creature weaker, and you are literally making this creature stronger. Again, it's got the whole kind of -1/-1 counter, +1/+1 counter thing. It's kind of doing so, having 2 different types of counters, but I like that it literally gets bigger. It seems pretty clean.
Yeah, I think that this is just really solid. It just feels like I like that it's self-enabling, but it also, um, I think you could honestly expand this to kind of just be whenever a -1/-1 counter is placed on a creature you don't control, you can put that many +1/+1
Yeah.
counters on Vitality Siphoner, make it a little bit more archetypey. But yeah, it's just a really solid design that, and again, like I've been harping on this all Moxtober, but mechanics as flavor is hype, and this does a great job of conveying that. So shout out to UnConstitutional for this design.
My only issue is um, cards like this that give bonuses when a creature deals damage to another creature. There's a lot of resonant, flavorful things you can do. You can go all the way back to Sanger Vampire, right? That when it kills a creature, it gets bigger. But the problem is in practice, all of that text just reads, "Don't block this creature."
Right.
You know what I mean? So it becomes a really fancy form of evasion that is like sometimes there's situations where you're okay letting your opponent get this bonus. Um, but too
Okay,
often
so
it,
what
it
you're
just means don't
saying
block
is,
this.
so what you're saying is we give this infect instead of wither. I got you. See, it's even
Well,
got the plague
honestly,
mask in the art.
that's
So,
why I think Infect is an upgrade of Wither because it it turns Wither from being like, oh, so I just won't block this so my creatures don't become lame, to, oh, but if I don't block this, that's a different problem, you know? But that's a tangent. But that's also why I really liked your idea, Caillou, of making it more of a static effect of whenever any counters are put on an opponent's creature.
Sure.
And that also makes it a better blocker, which is a more reliable way to use Wither, I think, because you're not leaving it up to your opponent whether they block you or not to give you the trigger. You're saying, if you ever want to attack me to win in this game, which is usually how one wins when playing Magic, this trigger is going to happen somehow, right? Um, and I think that would be a good way to spread the excellent resonance of the card into happening more often in the game.
Part of me
Mattering more,
wants
I guess.
part of me wants to make this like a 2/1 instead of a 2/3. Just have it. It seems like if you put this on the battlefield, it's just pretty hard to deal with, except with straight up removal. So part of me is kind of like, well, maybe we should try to make it a little bit harder, and give it a little bit more of a weakness. But
Yeah. Or more expensive if it's going to affect the whole battlefield and not just itself.
oh, right, right.
Yeah. Yeah, there's different ways you could do that. Is it my turn?
yep, go for it.
Okay, so the card that I want to talk about next is in the MSE file, and it's Sprocket Pickpocket.
Oh yeah.
which is very fun, designed by Jim Nelson. It's a silver bordered card, which are always
Oh
very
wait,
fun to read and look
Jim
at.
Nelson is the artist. It is actually, I
Oh,
believe,
you're right.
designed by Rodzos. Let me check that. Yeah, designed by
Yeah,
Rodzos.
that's what it says. My bad. I just looked for the name at the bottom, and that was the artist. Well, good job, Jim Nelson, on excellent art as well. And good design by Rodzos. So it's 2 and a blue artifact creature construct, and it has the flip flop mechanic, which says as this enters the battlefield, secretly choose flip or flop. Reveal the choice at any time. So it kind of uses a silver border secret choices thing, which does exist in, black border magic, but only for very few designs. And so the flip choice is when Sprocket Pickpocket deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And the flop is when Sprocket Pickpocket deals combat damage to a creature, draw a card. And this kind of gets at, what we were saying with the previous design, where, um, if all of the benefits require your opponent to block your creature, then you're not going to get that resonance in the gameplay as much as maybe you would like. And I like how here it's a game that I think can only be done with this mechanic or with morph type mechanics, where your opponent doesn't know if they want to block it or not block it, because there could be, they don't know which way you chose your advantage to be.
Or at least
And I
it's not a
like
game
that
that you can
sub
like
game.
do with a single card. It's usually that gameplay comes about from like having combat tricks, etc. But yeah,
Yeah,
the you,
yeah, exactly.
you can't have like that secrecy element with a single card usually.
There's the one card from um, the cons block that does like this weird thing with morphs where it manifests the top cards of your deck and then it shuffles itself among the cards it manifested. And then whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it like manifests more, but you have to reveal it. And so like your opponent doesn't know which of the morphs is the one. I like those kinds of
Oh,
design,
I need to
but
go
they
back
can
and
kind of
look at
draw too
that.
much attention to themselves. Yeah, I got to think of the name for that.
It feels
I-
very like this is a maybe a little bit of out there reference, but if you've ever watched or read Yu-Gi-Oh, there's the magical hats, um, where I don't think it works this way in the actual card game, but basically like it spawns three giant hats onto the battlefield, and then you store a creature in one of them, and so it's
Yeah,
like
it's like
oh
the shell game,
yeah,
right?
it turns it into like a shell game. So yeah, that was my like first exposure to that kind of idea in a card game setting. So that feels a lot like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a sub game that can kind of take over the game when you have three things that you're randomizing between. And I like that this is just one card, and the impact isn't enormous, but it is an impact and something to think about. So I just think it's really elegant and a nice use of that mechanic.
It does certainly feel like there's a lot of design space where you can secretly choose something and it's either A or B. And this was a card on my list too, just because I thought that this sort of ability is feels very fun. I mean, in actuality, it's basically just a thieving otter, but with a minor upside. But yeah, you kind of have to guess. It's certainly a guessing game, and I just like the art on this card too because it's kind of a good idea of I think a lot of the thieving cards we've seen here or will be seen. It's taking something from an opponent, and in this case, it's kind of drawing a card, which I think is absolutely fair. I'm
Yeah, and we have
gaining.
like Jessian, whatever, stuff that like has flavored.
That is true, like scroll thief and whatnot. So yeah, it's definitely on flavor.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
think when people have the prompt of thief or thievery, they think a lot of times like the most literal, like, all right, how do I steal from my opponent? And that kind of limits the mechanics that you have going on and what your cards are going to do. And you see a lot of patterns, right, because of that in all the designs. Um, and I like that it just is the flavor of thievery, but the bonus is not something that can make your opponent feel terrible, right? Where it's like, oh, you control my best creature, or oh, you made me discard my best card, and now you get to cast it using any mana, you know? So it helps you feel like a clever thief without your opponent feeling like they've just been had.
For sure. Um, Though I do think that some of the designs we've seen that do just directly take stuff from your opponent are sort of cool. And my next
Yeah.
design is going to be one of those. It's Highway Robbery from the MSC file, um, designed by Ren or Gateway 7. It's one black and a red, and you active treason, and then whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent this turn, you get to essentially use black's draw off the top of your opponent's library effect. I like this card a lot because Black Red Aristocrats is a story as old as time, but this feels like a really unique way to take to make a multi-card effect in the sense of like you have both very clearly black effect, very clearly red effect, um, and marry them together in a way that hasn't been done before. And I think it's a really interesting benefit to an active treason because usually it's like you gain control of a creature, that thing gets more power, or like there's like something that affects that creature directly. While here it's just like, hey, I have a benefit for having more creatures. And again, both of them are just straight up you're stealing your opponent's creature and then their library. So it felt like a very straightforward card, but a card that I'm like, wow, you're telling me this hasn't already been printed? So I'm a fan of this.
I think perhaps if I were to change one thing, I would have it say uh, uh, whenever one or more creatures deal combat damage to a player, because otherwise, if you're if you're have a few more creatures than your opponent, and then you take this one, you might be able to get in with 2, 3, 4 creatures, and then be able to. Although I don't know, maybe that's not actually that strong uh, of an effect, right? Just being able to cast. Uh, you're not going to be able to cast all the spells, presumably.
It's interesting because typically when you active treason, you're about to win the game, or it's early in a game and you've kind of miscast it, right? Like you take control of their bear and deal 2 extra damage and you feel cool, but then you realize you're a bad magic player when you lose, right? Um, and I think, the best time to active treason is when that will ensure you the win. You remove a blocker and add extra damage. But there's other times you can consider doing an act of treason and you think, well,
Mm-hmm.
they'll just let it hit their face, and all I've really done is get a little extra damage in.
Give
But
your
I
own
like
creature
how,
haste. Sure.
yeah, but I like how this says, well, if they let their own creature hit them instead of letting their own creature kill their other creature to prevent the face damage, um,
Yeah.
then I get a long-term advantage from that. So it changes the active treason narrative from being like, you do this when it will win you the game to you can do this for a longer term advantage, um, kind of tactically. I kind of wonder if that's why it hasn't been married because maybe those situations just aren't as common. Like you just want it to be a game ending thing as opposed to a you get long term value over time effect. But that does kind of change the calculus in an interesting way on both sides, right? Like it changes whether they're going to block their own creature or trade with their own creature to
Mm-hmm.
prevent you from getting card advantage.
And usually what happens is active treason sometimes like there are a lot of times where you don't active treason and the way that you end the game with it is you use it as pseudo removal with a sack outlet, right? That's
Yeah.
like the so I think that like allowing you to generate card advantage in a different way is not like significantly out there for the play patterns of an active treason. It's basically just like allowing you to take a board state that was not in your favor and flip around the situation for a turn while finding potentially getting you ways out of it. Like especially like uh, if your opponent is for some reason like if this is like a green blue versus red white matchup, you can maybe yoink a large creature they have and suddenly you're on an even playing field, that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I think you're right. And I agree with Ancestral that I'd probably tweak it to just be one or more creatures instead of just each creature. Um, because that I could see that getting out of hand in some situations. But that would
Yeah.
also feel like highway robbery, so that would be really resonant, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure because I could see it either way. Um, I honestly think it depends on like what rarity you want to print this at, if that makes sense. Like what context you're putting it in. I think for limited, it's probably better at one or more. I think if you wanted to push it to be a little bit more constructed focused, uh, I could see it saying just for each of them. But yeah, uh, yeah, I think with that, I don't have anything else to say. So shout out to Ren for making this design. Ancestral, what is your next card going to be?
Oh, actually, I think that was Gateway 7, right?
Yeah, Gateway Seven Ren. They're both like monikers of the
Oh,
same person.
gotcha. Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna go with well, there's actually there's two of them named Thief of Form. This is on MTG.design. The one I'm looking for is designed by NerdCashew. Let's hope that they're both not designed by them. Uh,
Nope,
yeah,
they appear to be
NerdCashew.
designed by different people. I got it up.
Yeah, good name, I guess. So 3 and a black. This is just a creature, and we'll get to that here in a second. Death touch 1/3. Whenever a creature dealt damage by Thief of Form this turn dies, you can exile it and exile that creature and this one, and then this returns to the battlefield as a copy of that creature. This might be a nod, maybe not, but I think it might be a nod here to Nameless One, which is the kind of the bit of trivia here is it's the only creature in Magic that doesn't have a creature type. And basically, yeah, I mean, basically, this just it doesn't it isn't a thing, right? You put this creature into play. It's not. It's sort of like it was sort of born but missing some features, and it kills something and it becomes that thing. It's a kind of like a shapeshifter, but it has no shape to begin with. So I just think this is really clever, and I like that it has no creature type.
Yeah, I like. I just feel like it's really resonant, and I like that. Well, is it a May? Yeah, it's a May. Well, I was gonna say I like that the new creature it becomes kind of has this drawback of exiling itself and continuing to switch forms, but it's a May. You can just decide to keep the new one if you want, which is nice. There's a fun little game of like, how am I
Mm-hmm.
gonna get my opponent to have their creature deal damage to this? Like how am I gonna get this to deal damage to a creature? And I like those little puzzles.
Yeah, I think that like it does run into the issue of what you said before, where they can just not block. So you definitely want to probably combine this with like some sort of green provoke effect. Um, but I could definitely
Yeah.
see like dropping some sort of other incentive, like basically all the stuff we mentioned earlier about uh making your cards that deal damage to opponents' creatures matter in interesting ways, slash have like making it so that your opponent is actually incentivized to block in some way is something I think that this design should gain. But we already talked a lot about that, so yeah.
I guess the body kind of already does that because it becomes a really good value blocker where
Mm-hmm.
a 1/3 death touch is a tricky thing to attack into for a lot of creatures. Um, and you're kind of ensuring that this will trade with something with 3 power, and then you get something with 3 power as long as you hold it back to block stuff. 3 or more power, I should say. So it's probably what's it called? A speed bump, or a value speed bump in a mid-rangey deck, I guess.
Does this ability trigger if Thief of Form also dies?
Hmm.
I'm not sure.
I don't know. I feel like you, because it has death touch, you could just have it whenever Thief of Form deals damage to a creature, you may exile both Thief of Form and that creature.
So I was thinking of like fight spells, or certainly bite spells would work as an alternative to killing a creature, and that could be really fun. So if you had a rabid bite, then you wouldn't have to worry about attacking or, in combat, and then just kind of steal the biggest creature on the board.
Yeah.
And technically, I mean, I don't know if there would be a big reason to do this, but maybe if there was like strong out of the battlefield effects. But I guess you could technically eat your own creature. But I don't know. It's certainly a very unique design.
Yeah, I love the idea of like subsuming another creature, and I think that that core both mechanic and flavor, not like I guess concept is something that is definitely compelling. Okay, Zarepath, what is your next card going to be?
So my next card is in the MSE file, and it's Lion Wait by Gateway 7, or yeah, Gateway 7. And it's a kill spell. So, not just a creature this time. Uh, I feel like there were a lot of creatures. I guess when the prompt is literally a noun like thief, that, that's going to happen. But it's called Lion Wait. It's 1 and a black and a black. It's an instant with kicker 2 and a black. And it says destroy target creature. If Lion Wait was kicked, return it to the battlefield under your control. This is another just clean resonant design, which apparently I like those a lot. But I actually picked this one because as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, you know how this card needs to be changed to make it amazing? Uh, I would make the kicker blue because, like, the most obvious problem with the card is that black being able to kill something and then return it to the battlefield under your control is technically two black things, but when you pair them together, that you're just mind controlling, which black can do in certain sets with downsides and stuff at a rate that's not as powerful as blue. But when you're stapling it to a murder, that's really really strong, right? Um, but this suddenly becomes a really cool off-color kicker design if you have like two blue blue as the kicker, or you change the rates a little bit. Um, I mean, if it were me, I'd change the rates a little bit because it's very powerful, right?
Mhm.
But it becomes a really powerful incentive to splash in some blue. Or if you're a black deck that has treasure, this gives you an incentive to save that treasure, maybe to not just kill their biggest threat, but to gain control of it. And it fits the flavor. The flavor text does some work to sell the concept of either killing something or making it join you. It says if you want to prove yourself so badly, meet me in the back alleys at sundown. If you're good enough, I'll even let you join up. And I like this idea of a trial where if you're not good enough, we'll kill you. But if we like you enough, we'll make you join us. And that's a different kind of thievery of, uh, by
Yeah,
threat, by force, right? Like you're either not good enough, we kill you, or you're gonna join us.
yeah. I didn't put this on my list after seeing it because it felt like a little too straightforward. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, okay, you killed something and you get it back. There's not much
Right.
play there. I also thought that the flavor was less resonant because I felt like it would have been cooler to have like the front end, quote unquote, be like a red spell that deals damage. So it's like, oh, yeah, if it ends up like surviving the damage, we yoink it essentially. Something like
Oh, I
I
like
felt like
that.
the flavor text was telling a story that didn't jive with the mechanics of the card, and I didn't vibe with the mechanics of the card in because it just felt like yeah, what I already said, very straightforward. So I like the suggestion of like I think a blue kicker is a really cool way to potentially um, if not change the flavor of the card, definitely make the mechanics a little bit more like, okay, what am I doing here?
Yeah, I actually really like the idea of making it red because um, one of the downsides of kicker effects is like you feel bad for not using the kicker effect when you have less mana. But if it's like a shock with a mind control potentially stapled onto it, early on, you're not going to regret like, should I shock this bear or wait till I have 6 mana to mind control it? You know what I mean? Or um, like it gives dimension to the two different ways of playing the card that won't make players feel as bad for having to choose to build up to their kicker, and it makes it clear when you should and when you shouldn't. Like you're gonna wait until you can cast the kicker side if they have a bunch of uh, colossal dreadmaws and stuff, right? Your shock isn't going to do that much to those things, so it becomes clear, when to use which side of the card. So I guess what we're saying is this black card is really excellent because it made us design a red card with blue kicker.
So it's interesting. There's been a discussion about how colors can do things in Pi, but when you combine their effects, it's it's basically a Pi break. For
Right.
example, one example is if you blue has uh, a bounce effect where you can bounce a permanent or like a creature to the top of your library or its owner's library. And then blue also has the ability to mill. So you can, if you created a card that said return target creature to the top of its owner's library and then mill one, well, congratulations, you just have a kill spell, right? A black, probably a black kill spell. And so I think this is kind of a situation where basically lie in wait is I'm going to steal your creature. Not literally, there's some effects going on. It dies, it comes back, but you take a black destruction effect, a black reanimate effect, put it together, and it's kind of a blue effect. So, like you were saying earlier, the blue kicker is probably kind of smart. I also wonder if it might be a little strong. The being an instant, I do think that there's some interesting like gameplay, and I know we talked about this on some of the previous days about like instant speed, creating blockers to block something. Um, but another situation where uh, you can wait until your opponent is attacking you and just kind of turn the tables.
Yeah, I think I like this better as a sorcery. Uh,
Yeah, the ability to
just
like kill an attacker and then have a surprise blocker is definitely a lot TM.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, I forgot the other thing I was going to say, but yeah, I think. Oh, I was just going to say that when you combine two effects from the same color to create an an effect in total that the color normally can't do, you're kind of robbing players the discovery moments of marrying
Right.
those two effects from separate cards in their deck.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Like first strike and death touch, that kind of thing.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think unless anyone else has stuff to say about this specific card, um,
Nah.
my next card is also one that like I think had a little bit of a color pie kerfuffle. So it started out, actually, I guess the story that leads to the card I want to talk about. Um, so let me find actually, because I wrote down the card that I liked that came of this, but there is a previous card. Yeah, Intimidation in the MSC file. Um,
Oh,
so
okay, yeah.
designed by
You keep picking
BoofTroupe,
cards I wanted to talk about. I'm glad.
but yeah, so this was designed by BoofTroupe, and I think that there's something here in that like I think there are a lot of cards which like have triggers which are in their color but lead into effects which are not, or that lead into effects where the play pattern is something that is usually antithetical or against the color. So Intimidation came up. There was a whole discussion about like, well, does green get mind control? With the answer realistically being in the current pie, no, green does not get mind control, even if the way that it's getting it is by an effect that is prototypically green. But I like the I like where this led because it led BoofTroupe to design another green card for Thief that was super cool, which is a Raccoon Rogue, also in the MSC file, which is one green, Death Touch. When it deals combat damage to an opponent, draw a card. It's a very efficient saboteur, but it's one that is like it has an evasion keyword in green, technically, or an evasion keyword that would make sense on a small creature, not the trample. Um, and green getting like curiosity style effects is something that's obviously been explored with stuff like Sixth Sense. You have OK Mad Adversary and Eldraine. Um, and this just feels like a natural progression, and it makes sense for green to get card advantage through creatures. So this is definitely a very efficient implementation of that particular effect, but it's one that I think is a really cool proof of concept. So, and also raccoons are cute, and this makes a lot of sense for today's flavor, especially since we're seeing a lot of like we mentioned earlier, Grixis colors have kind of been dominating the general card pool for Thief. So always a welcome to see a card outside of those colors.
Yeah, I remember the discussion, and and I guess it's green. Oftentimes is the well, green's kind of an interesting situation because it could be go wide or it could be go tall. Um, the Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what I was trying to get at here, but the I think a lot of times the this kind of goes back to our discussion we were talking about Sprocket Pickpocket. It's sort of, do I want to block this or do I want to let this through? And like you said, we've seen this with OKM Adversary. For 2 mana, I think it's definitely it's kind of it's the additional thing too that I really like about this Death Touch. A lot of times is, I think a lot of players like not attacking with it because you get to choose how to block, right? So you can save it and you can just block the biggest creature, and that kind of leads to board stalls, and opponents have to try to figure out what to do, or they need trample or whatever it might be. So what's kind of interesting here is you got this extra ability that says, hey, well, if you attack and you get through, you can draw a card. So it's sort of almost no matter what you do, you're sort of rewarded. Like if you don't attack with it, you can potentially take out your opponent's biggest attacker. If you do attack with it and they block, hopefully the blocks are good, and again, you'll be able to take out a creature. It's a 1-for-1. If you get through, you get to draw a card, and if your opponent destroys it or puts some kind of pacifism effect on it, well, then they just wasted one of those spells on a 2-mana creature. So it's kind of ingenious in a way, that sort of effect of no matter the outcome, you're sort of getting a lot of value for it.
Yeah. I don't have much to add on this one.
Word, no problem. Um, and as we move into Ancestral's next card, I would also like to note that since we've passed the 50-minute mark, this is going to be our last card for the day. So make your choice with that in mind.
Okay.
Or like each of your last cards for the day. So when you're choosing your next ones.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm gonna go with Charismatic Charlatan. This is on mtg.design. 1 red. Has haste. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of artifacts and/or creatures. If you do, until end of turn, you get a creature an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to that, and then it's basically act of treason. But I kind of like this because most of the time, it's act of treason is, it's just straight up. There's just no extra conditions. So here, in the right deck, you can. I guess it's for better or for worse, it's a sack outlet, but you're gaining. It's sort of a way to restrict kind of what you're gaining control of. The Actually, the art's kind of cool because charlatan is sort of a word, I think, that was people are familiar with, like someone who is defrauding or kind of that snake oil salesman sort of, is basically stealing or gaining money from a populace, something like that. They're like a highway robberman. And so it's got this like very old school picture there, which I love. But yeah, I don't know. I guess those are my thoughts on it.
I also I almost put this on my list because I liked a lot of similar things. I have an act and sack artifact in Karsus, a sacrifice artifact archetype, and sorry, I said that weirdly. I have a sacrifice archetype in Karsus, and one thing that I realized was, you know, it would be really nice for the signpost to be a creature that could benefit if you gain control of your opponent's stuff, but would also be a way to gain control of their stuff. And I like when the card can do both halves of the things, right? Like it can sacrifice other things, or it can be the thing that helps you gain control of the other thing to sacrifice with something else. That just helps the deck sing a little better. So I like that. And I do like that you have to give something to get something. And as charismatic as charlatans often are, they do a lot of emotional giving and a lot of work to try and get people to feel comfortable with their scams. That just felt true to me. And my only thing is, if you get to actually the practicalities of playing it, to steal a 2/2 bear for one turn, you have to sacrifice 2 permanents, and that seems kind of steep to me.
Mhm.
Yeah, what I was
I
actually thinking was maybe a variation is with mana value equal to or less than the combined mana values of
Oh,
those
yeah, there you
separate.
go.
Yeah, the problem is then you can't use treasures or other usually disposable permanents as well. So
Mhm.
there's
Right.
definitely like it's not like a strict upside in terms of the play pattern of the design, but it's like an alternate thing that I was thinking of while you guys were talking.
Yeah, that makes it interesting as like a sideways power move in the power level of the card that I like. Or you could just fix it a little bit and make it like you can gain control of any creature, but you have to always sacrifice 2 artifacts and or creatures. Um, and probably 2 other artifacts and or creatures. It feels a little weird. You can sacrifice itself and as part of the
Sure.
count.
Which actually that might be kind of smart. Because being a 1/3 does have haste, but 1/3 is not particularly an interesting attacker in most scenarios.
That's true. That's true.
Okay, and with that, Zarepath, choose the last card that we're going to be looking at today.
So mine is experience drain. Um, from the MTG design design, and it's 1 and a blue, and then a hybrid blue black and a black. For an instant, it says choose a keyword ability on target creature an opponent controls. That creature loses that keyword ability. Then put a keyword counter of that keyword ability on target creature you control. And it's designed by GiantEnemy. I actually, like, as a card, I don't actually like this card. I think it has a bunch of issues. But the thing that excited me was this use of the keyword counter technology
Mm-hmm.
as a way to track specific things. I think keyword counters open up a lot of design space that custom designers have been exploring, and I think there's still a lot more out there. And I just love the idea of a card that can literally steal keywords from opponents, which before keyword counters, I think the only way you're doing that is by cloning something, right? Or an evil twin or those kinds of effects. I really like the idea of creating keyword counters based on the qualities of what your opponents have. Um, I think this is like too expensive for a very niche effect, right? Like, what if your opponent is just playing vanilla creatures? They don't have keywords, or the keywords they have aren't actually useful for what you need in the moment. But I think there's a seed here to something really interesting that could probably be a really excellent ability on another creature, on maybe a rare creature that, when it enters, it makes an opponent. Uh, well, I don't have the design in my head, but I feel like this would be. There's something here that would be good on another design, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the flavor of this is off the charts for what it's doing. So I think that
Yeah.
um, this is also on my list, and for very much the same reasons you said. I like the flavor text, the little Mimi reference to the studying the blade
Yeah.
over there. Um, but yeah, I don't know that I have super much to add beyond what you said. You really captured the essence of why I like and why I wish this card was better.
If it like destroyed target creature, and then you can choose a keyword ability if it had one, and then put a counter of that type on a creature you control.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
I would like
I
that.
I 100% remember seeing that on the subreddit at some point. That was definitely one of the popular post Ikoria designs that I think was on the subreddit a bunch.
Oh
So
yeah, I could see that. I could believe that. But
Yeah.
I
It's
think that works because then the base rate is always worth playing, right? And then
for sure.
sometimes you get a very flavorful bonus.
it's kind of funny when you. So Wizards always likes having one of these. It's typically a white creature that it gains the keywords that you have from your other creatures, and it's always kind of interesting when, especially when a set introduces a new keyword, and you kind of look backwards into Magic design where oh well, if your creatures have flying, first strike, and haste, and skulk or
Prowess.
protection or whatever, right? Prowess.
Yeah.
It's some of these keywords come and go, and when Wizards wants to reprint cards, they have to be kind of careful about. And really, what they're trying to do is, I think Wizards really just wants to be able to do this kind of keyword ability thing. And yeah, Ikoria made that a lot easier, but obviously we don't have keyboard counters for all the keywords, and there's certainly arguments to be made. Maybe that's not needed. All of a sudden players are playing with 100 counters on all their permanents, but
Right.
um, I agree with you 100%. I think this is like a really interesting, cool design. I think that you could certainly do something a lot with this, and I could totally see if ever Wizards ever goes back to Ikoria, I could totally see them being like, hey, just take a keyword counter from a creature that of your choice. Channeling, draining experience. Uh, it's I guess it's not always a one for one with counters and experience, but for the most part, like, hey, if I'm really menacing, or if I'm I have reach, those could be trained abilities. So yeah, I think it's kind of cool.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think with that, we can wrap up today's episode. Nice. And it's also right ahead of an hour, which usually these episodes just naturally end up. I expect them to end up expanding to an hour and 10, hour and 20 minutes, but we got there today. Um,
Nice.
so thanks, Ancestral and Zarepath, for joining me today. Thanks, Ancestral and Cajun, for setting up MTG.design and LackeyBot's Discord to MSC features, respectively. Without them, these episodes would literally not be possible because we would not be able to collect all of the cards on such an efficient basis. So big shouts to them. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about in regards to collecting cards, you can find the collected files and the instructions on how you could submit your own cards to those files in the description, along with all of the designer credits for the cards we talked about today. But yeah, until tomorrow, this is going to be Caillou signing off. Thanks for watching, y'all.